Pay attention to this right now because one day this could be you, pulled over on the side of the road. The officer walks up, looks at the car, and says the phrase that freezes any driver. I smell marijuana, I'm going to search the car. And in that second, most people freeze up. They get nervous, start explaining, start pleading, and without realizing it, they give up a right the Constitution already guarantees them. Because smell, by itself, is not a warrant, it's not a confession, and it doesn't obligate you to give up anything. But there's one specific phrase, short and direct, that completely changes the direction of that stop. And almost nobody knows how to say it at the right moment. If you drive in the United States, this could be the difference between an illegal search being accepted without question or you protecting your rights at the exact moment they try to take them from you. Before I show you exactly what to say, like this video and subscribe to the channel. That helps us bring this kind of information to more drivers who can't afford a lawyer, but who have every right to know how to protect themselves. Here's what nobody tells you about this kind of stop. The officer knows exactly what effect that phrase has on you. He knows that in most people's minds, smell of marijuana sounds like a final verdict, as if from that point on, there's no decision left to make, like all that's left is to open the door and let him work. And it's exactly that automatic reaction that usually works against the driver, because that's not really how it works. The first thing you need to remember, don't panic, and don't start arguing right there on the spot. Any innocent person's instinct is to want to explain themselves, to swear they haven't done anything wrong, almost to beg the officer to believe them. But that rarely helps. In practice, it just opens more room for the conversation to continue, more chance that you'll say something that later becomes a problem. Now here's the question that really matters. Does the simple fact that the officer says he smelled marijuana already give him total freedom to search the whole car? The answer isn't a straight yes, and it isn't a straight no either. In several U.S. states, an odor claim can, in fact, count as part of what the law calls probable cause, the concept at the center of any discussion about the Fourth Amendment, the one that protects you against unreasonable search and seizure. But here's the point that changes everything. Probable cause is not the same thing as you giving up your rights. They're two completely different things, and that confusion is exactly what most drivers fall into in the heat of the moment. There's a clear line between obeying a legitimate order from an officer and voluntarily giving up a right the Constitution already guarantees you. Not physically resisting his authority is one thing. Saying something like, "Go ahead and look, I don't have anything to hide," which can later be used as if you'd given permission for everything, is something else entirely.
This is the moment when most people lose control of the situation without even realizing it. The nervousness hits, the heart races, and the mouth starts talking before the brain has really processed what's being said. "Go ahead and look, there's nothing in there." "I swear I didn't smoke today." "There's just a smell from a friend who smoked last week, but it's not mine." Sentences like these seem harmless, seem like just a desperate attempt to explain yourself, but each one can be interpreted very differently from what you intended. Because, in practice, a trained officer isn't just listening to what you say in the literal sense. He's watching how you speak, what slips out, and above all, whether at any point you open the door for him to act. And that's exactly where the danger of this conversation lies. The difference between a stop that ends in a few minutes and one that turns into a full vehicle search can come down to a single, poorly chosen sentence.
Think of it this way. There's a huge difference between staying politely silent without confronting and blurting out anything just to fill the uncomfortable silence. Silence is uncomfortable. That's human. Nobody likes standing quietly in front of an officer next to the car, but it's exactly that discomfort that a lot of people try to resolve by talking too much, and talking too much is where the problem lives. Now, before I show you exactly what you should say, I want you to understand one thing. There's no magic here, no combination of words that makes the officer simply give up and walk away. What exists is a way for you to put your position on record clearly, directly, without leaving room for interpretation. And that completely changes what can happen afterward in case that search actually goes ahead. Because here's the point. Few people understand. Even if the officer searches the car anyway, even if he ignores what you say, there's a massive difference between a driver who stayed completely silent without putting anything on record and a driver who said, in no uncertain terms, that they were not authorizing that search. That difference might not stop the search in the moment, but it can be decisive later, depending on how things unfold. Here's the phrase that changes everything. I do not consent to this search. Simple as that. No yelling, no arguing, no confrontational tone, just that. And before you think it's not much, understand why those 6 words carry so much weight. The key point here is the difference between two things a lot of people confuse. Not consenting and physically resisting? They're completely different things, and that confusion is what leads innocent drivers into serious trouble, or costs them rights that were already theirs. Saying, "I don't consent," isn't disobeying any order. It's not pushing the officer, not slamming the door in his face, not raising your voice. It's simply putting on record, in your own words, that whatever is about to happen doesn't have your authorization. Why does this matter so much? Because in any situation involving the Fourth Amendment, there's a huge legal difference between a search that happened because the driver agreed to it and a search that happened despite the driver's express refusal. When you consent, you essentially take off the table much of your ability to later challenge what was found. When you don't consent, and you make that clear, you preserve the possibility of contesting all of it later, whether with a lawyer or in front of a judge. Now comes the part that tends to catch people off guard. You say the phrase as politely and firmly as possible, and the officer simply responds with something like, "Doesn't matter, I'm searching anyway." So what do? Here's the decisive point. You should not and must not try to physically stop that search. Your job in that moment isn't to win an argument right there on the street, or to physically block what's happening with your own body. Your job is to make it absolutely clear, verbally, that this does not have your consent, and then let the facts unfold from there. Repeat the phrase if you need to. "I do not consent to this search." Again, if necessary, without raising your tone, without losing your composure, because in the end, what matters isn't winning against the officer in that exact moment on the roadside. What matters is who will have to justify afterward why that search happened without authorization. And it's about that afterward, about what happens when the officer ignores your refusal and goes ahead anyway, that we continue now. There's a moment when the tension really rises. You've already said the phrase, calmly, politely, and the officer still responds with something like, "The smell is already enough, you don't have a choice here." His tone changes, his posture changes, and suddenly it feels like the decision was already made before you even open your mouth again. This is exactly the moment when a lot of people lose their cool, and exactly the moment when you can't afford to lose yours. Arguing at this point doesn't change the outcome of the search. Raising your voice doesn't change the outcome of the search. Trying to physically stop it, putting your hand on the door, standing in front of the car, that also doesn't change the outcome of the search. It just turns a traffic stop into something completely different, something that can involve charges of obstruction, resisting arrest, or worse. And then, even if the search was illegal from the start, now there's a brand new problem, one you created, that has nothing to do with the smell of marijuana. So what's the real strategy in this moment? Put your disagreement on record without creating physical resistance. Repeat, if you need to, that you are not consenting. Ask for the officer's name and badge or patrol car number, if you can, calmly, without hostility. If you have your phone at hand, and it's safe to do so, and your state's law allows it, recording audio of the stop can be a powerful tool later. Pay attention to every detail. How many officers are present, exactly what they say, how long the search takes, what they touch, what they open. These details seem small in the moment, in the middle of the adrenaline, but later, when the situation is reviewed calmly, each one of them can make a huge difference. Because there's a truth few drivers understand in the heat of the moment. The goal there isn't to beat the officer on the street. Nobody wins a physical or verbal confrontation against someone armed and with legal authority to act in that instant. The goal is to walk away from that stop in one piece, safe, and with as much information preserved as possible for later. Because it's later, far from the tension of the roadside, that the really important question gets answered. If you didn't authorize that search, and the officer did it anyway, who's going to have to explain why that happened? And it's exactly about that later that we close out this story now. The search ends. Whether the officer found something or found nothing, the moment he closes the car door and heads back to his patrol car marks the start of a different phase. One that a lot of people ignore, but that can matter just as much as the stop itself. If nothing was found, the relief is immediate, and it's normal to just want to get out of there as fast as possible. But before driving off, it's worth writing down, still in the car, with your heart still racing, but your mind already calmer. The exact time, the location, the officer's name, and patrol car number if you managed to get them, what was said, as close to word for word as possible, and above all, whether you verbally stated that you were not consenting to the search. These details, written down while still fresh in your memory, are worth far more than a vague recollection told weeks later. If something was found, the situation changes, and that's exactly where the difference between having said, "I don't consent," and having stayed completely silent can become decisive. Because anything seized in a search that happened without authorization, and despite an express refusal, can later be challenged in front of a lawyer and eventually in front of a judge. There's an entire legal path that deals with exactly this, challenging the legality of a search based on the Fourth Amendment and asking that improperly obtained evidence be thrown out of the case. But none of that works well if there's no record of what happened. That's why preserving information, whether through notes, through recording where legally allowed, or simply remembering the sequence of events clearly, becomes just as important as anything said during the stop itself. And here's the question that sums up everything we've built so far. If you made it clear that you were not authorizing that search, in your own words, calmly and on record, but the officer did it anyway, who's going to have to sit down afterward and explain why it happened that way? Because most of the time, it isn't the driver who has to prove they were right. It's the other side that has to justify why they ignored a clear refusal. And it's precisely by knowing how to handle moments like these that a lot of people manage to protect their rights at a time when most just panic. If this video helped you understand better what to say and what not to say in a stop like this, like it now. That helps a lot more people get access to this information. And if you want to keep learning about your rights as a driver, about what to do in situations like this, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the first of many conversations we're going to have here. Until next time.